Okay. Okay, here we go. Fine. This year we're going to be studying Masechet Gittin, which is very exciting. Whether we've studied in the past or not seems to be irrelevant since I don't seem to remember, but Danny has notes. So that's not so good. Whatever it is, whatever. We're talking about 20 years or something like that. So it could be that it makes sense that we studied Gittin. It's important. Usually we go Moed, Nashim Mazikin, Moed, Nashim Mazikin, Moed, Nashim Mazikin. But Danny voted for not doing that because the last 4 years, at least the last 4 years, I know what we did.
Yeah.
Can you go backwards, right? Last year we did Bava Metzia. The year before that we did Moed Katan. The year before that we did Bava Basra. The year before that we did. Right, that was 5 years ago. Right. Okay. Fine. Anyway, this year we're going to be doing Gittin. Gittin is the main focus of our study this year. Will be number one, the world of shtarot and what kind of shtar this is, and that we'll already introduce today. But the other thing that's much more interesting, good morning, Seth, is what does it get in general, and to what extent does it get sui generis? To what extent is it unique in terms of its capacity to affect Gerushin, and how does that reflect? And this already we'll discuss this morning. How does that reflect on what Kiddushin is? So the first thing to note before we even begin the Psukim, which is of course where we're going to start today, the first thing to note is that the first Mishnah and the last Mishnah really represent kind of opposite ways of addressing what the issue of Gittin is. The first Mishnah in Gittin talks about Mevi get, right? We're already in the parsha of Gittin. The Shaliach is bringing a get from Medina Hayam to Eretz Yisrael, apparently, and saying B'fanei nechtam, B'fanei nechtam. And if I was starting my Masechet Gittin, I would have started the last Mishnah, right? The last Mishnah talks about what are the causes. What's the word in Hebrew, English? That someone is allowed to, divorce someone. On what basis? Basis, there's got to be a better word for it. But the last Mishnah talks about, and we'll just take a look at it for a minute. If you just take a look at Daf Tzadi for a moment, you will see this. This is mamash the last page. Tzadi Amud Aleph. Beit Shammai Omrim Lo Yigaresh Adam et Ishto Ela Im Kein Matzah Ba Tvar Irva. Right. The only reason this might be right. The scholars talk about the Christian, dimensions of this, but of course that developed later or parallel. But only if you find some sort of Irvat Tavar, right, or it's Shnei Marki sexual impropriety. Shnei Marki Matzah Irvat Tavar. Beit Hillel Omrim Afilu Hikdicha Tavshilo. Even if that literally means if she messed up his food. Again, Mefarshim take this in different ways. Right? The Khatam Sofer says this is all a metaphor. It's some sort of sexual metaphor. But I think the simple reading is that really, there's very little, you don't have to have very strong basis for initiating a divorce. Shneimar ki matzah, again, he quotes the same pasuk, but what he really focuses on in the Gemara there on Daf Tzadi, he talks about it is davar. Or in other words, anything is the basis for divorce. And Rabbi Akiva goes even farther, and he says, "Afilu matzah acheret na'eh mena." Even if you find someone more beautiful than she, and Amar vayayim lo timtzachen beina. Words. This already again. These are the basis for the discussion. And again, we could think about the difference between Judaism's approach to divorce and Christianity's approach to divorce, which again is subtle in the Mishnah, but perhaps there. But it does raise the question, on what basis did Rebbe formulate the whole set of Mishnah? In other words, why did he put this at the end? This is definitely where I would have started. And the Mefarshim have all sorts of, approaches to that, none of which I find particularly compelling. But it does raise the question about what is this Masechet really about, if not only getting divorced. So we also we'll remind ourselves that Gittin comes in the Mishnah right before Kiddushin, and perhaps that's a reason that this Mishnah ends up at the end, because we talk about the basis for Gittin, and then we move into how Kiddushin happens. So Kiddushin happens a little more straightforward, right? Aisha niknit b'shlosha drachim, bekesef shtar b'bi. It's a little more straightforward in terms of the place you start there. So I just raised that as an introduction. I don't have a good answer right now, but hopefully over the course of the year we'll be able to do it. But this Mishnah, the last Mishnah in Masechet Gittin, does raise the question of the role of the Psukim. So let's begin with the Psukim, which is on the introductory sheet in front of you, and I'm going to just make the sheet for those who are watching at home a little bigger. I'll make the text a little bigger so you can see.
Make that question to why also Gittin is before Kiddushin. Leave us the joke about.
Yeah, no. It's a Talmud. No, it's yes that. Tosfot addresses that question as well in the beginning of Kiddushin, but and the joke aside, Yeah, in other words, it does raise the question about, is there something about Gittin that reflects on what the nature of marriage is? Gittin is, of course, not the happiest moment in a couple's life, and certainly in terms of just the name of it, right? In other words, Kiddushin is given the name of Kedusha, right? In other words, it has some sort of omni significance, and Gittin, we don't know exactly what a get is yet, but we'll figure that out over the course of time. But it sounds like somehow they wanted you to understand something about Kiddushin via Gittin in some way. So that we'll explore a little more. What's remarkable or striking, the first thing we do when we come to the Psukim in Perikaf Dalet of the Torah, I don't know if you ever noticed this before, is that the Torah doesn't say there's a mitzvah of Gittin. In fact, the Torah doesn't even talk about Gittin. It talks about Gittin in some other context, right? No, not about what's there. That's him if he hates her, right? But get itself there is a pasuk of a man marries a woman, right? That does exist, right? This is the pasukim in front of you in the first source. If a man marries a woman and has relationships with her and intimacy with her, that's the pasuk that Beit Shammai just quoted. If he doesn't like her because he found either ervat or davar, then it says, okay, there's a number of dimensions to Gittin, and we have to figure out what they are. One is katavla, he has to write to her. Right? The law is important. That we're going to learn about lishma later on, for those who have done this Masechet before. Sefer kritut, we're going to learn, is something that divides between her and him, whereas it has to be final, or it has to be kritut. In other words, you're not allowed to have, right, literally, the Gemara says no strings attached. Okay, we'll come back to all this later on. The third element is, so we have, or maybe we can count more. For katav, it has to be written. 2, it has to be written for her. 3, it has to be a sefer that's correct, right? A book, I guess that's 3. It has to be some sort of sefer. Talking about that. Kritut, it has to divide between them. 5th, v'natan biyada, he has to give it to her. Which is, right? So Danny already knows where I'm going with this, which is the get? Is it the writing? Is it the writing for her? Is it the sefer? Is it the kritut? Is it the giving? Which is the main part, and which are all the other nice things to have? And then the last part, which is actually quite dramatic, is it's not enough to do this. If it's a shtar, if it's a regular shtar, so I can just give it to you, right? And we have a transaction, and that transaction is affected by the shtar. But here, in get, there's another dimension, which we never heard in any other shtar ever, which is v'shilcha mi beita. He has to also send her away from her house. Does that mean if she's still in the house, they're not divorced? Right? That actually provides a little drama to this whole story, right? You with me? Right? Is that okay? But none of that is what is the context of this star of the psukim. The psukim were a totally different thing, right? By the way, I should say also, if we were learning kiddushin, we'd say the same thing because the Torah never talks about kiddushin twice or 3 times. The Torah mentions it. This is one of them. It mentions it. If a man marries a woman and then gets divorced, okay, that also reflects something about the fact that divorce and marriage, the extent to which they're flip sides, and we have to ask ourselves which flip side there. I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Okay, anyway, what happens in the psukim? The context of divorce is when she goes and marries somebody else, and then which the Gemara in the 9th parak of Gittin talks about, that the second marriage is sometimes doomed to failure. And then he writes her a sefer kritut and he gives to her, and he sends her out from her house. And again, note that it says it twice. Oh, or if the second husband dies, then what's the whole context of this? The whole context of this is lo, and I want you to be sensitive to the psukim here. Lo yuchal ba'alah harishon asher shilcha. The first husband who sent her away. Note that's the 3rd time that shilcha mi beito appears, right? Lashuv lekachta liot lo liisha. He's not allowed to marry her again. So the whole context is you're not allowed to come back and marry her again. Very fascinating, dramatic even, I would say. Acharei, and here the Torah uses a word that is so strong that Chazal actually take it completely out of context. If you look at Rashi on this, I didn't bring it today, but I just brought the Ramban. But Acharei asher hu tama'a, since she has been defiled, right? Chazal take this to mean these words. Anybody remember? It's talking about sota. Mm-hmm. That if we find out that the sota was guilty, the guy can't come along and say, "Oh, it's an isser for him to come back and marry her again." Mm-hmm. Right? In other words, if she was guilty of right? In other words, and while she's in the middle of being on trial, so to speak, he's not allowed to be with her. The rabbis, it's nothing to do with get. They don't even know what this word asher hu tamah means. What do you mean? Oh, no. The reasoning I'm saying, this is I'll put it this way: the whole context of Gittin reaches a crescendo not when a man divorces his wife, but when a man divorces his wife, gets remarried again, divorces her, then here's the crescendo of the psukim. Oh, then they can't get married again. But when the Torah describes them, then they can't get married again, it actually uses strange words of Ashrei Asher Utama, Ki Toava Hi Lifnei Hashem, very powerful words. That's a Toava Lifnei Hashem. And not only that, but it actually destroys the integrity of the living in the land, right? The dream of the Bible. So this is actually quite, right? This is, when you look at these stories, explosive material. And the question is why? Why would this be such a strange thing? And especially the word hutama. And we look at the Ramban says something, he's very sensitive to the language, and he says something that's very, very interesting. And after quoting Rashi and saying this relates to Sota, and I get that, etc., the Ramban says something very interesting, which might be a good opening towards understanding what Gittin is about. Al derech hapshat, right? That's the way the Ramban usually, right? The Ramban has al derech haemet, that's Kabbalah, and al derech hapshat is his particular reading of the thing, of the biblical text, and then he has, al derech hazal. And often the Ramban will quote 2 or 3 of these things. The Ramban, writing al derech hapshat, addressing this last thing, the crescendo of the psukim regarding the Gittin, which again is, I'm coming in through kind of like the back door here. Lebal Rishon. In other words, that phrase means that she has been defiled to the second husband to the first husband, once she's with the second guy. Yermos, says the Ramban, and again, you could put this in the context of 13th century Barcelona if you want, but Yermo, and he was living on, of course, under Christian rule, etc. Ki asher yeda'a ish acher techashev lo tme'ah. It's considered a defilement for him if she was with another man. Ve'elu mitzvot mechudashot beget uvechazara. I don't know why it says chazira, but it should be chazara. These are mitzvot mechudashot regarding a get. Okay, what he means here is something technical. This is not important. This is just an aside. The Ramban always struggles. He provides a big thesis about why there's mitzvot in Dvarim. After all, isn't Dvarim just supposed to be Moshe's last speech? So why are there mitzvot there? So he talks about chidushim, like ibum and stuff like that. Like there's chidushim. So here he says, this is an addition that we didn't know about before, this whole notion of get, etc. That's not whatever. But now he gets to the part that's really, really interesting. V'tam halav hazeh, the reason or the explanation for this prohibition to go back to your first husband. Again, it's not like a woman who gets divorced can go back to her first husband, right? Except if she's a Kohen, right? But if she marries someone else, then she's not allowed to go back to her husband. And again, the Torah has very strong words for someone who does that. Tum'ah, tachtiyat haaretz, etc. Says the Ramban, Kedei shelo yachlifu neshotehen ze lazeh. We don't want, or it's the purpose of all the laws or this particular law of Gittin, is we don't want people, right, swiping wives. He uses the very phrase, Yiten la get ba'erev, uvavoker hi shava ilav. Right? Here he's, right? And he's quoting, he's echoing a pasuk. Where is it? What pasuk is it? Right, Megillat Esther. Very good. Right? You understand? You see that in the background? You don't see it? Uvavoker hi shava, right? Right? That's what Achashverosh did. Right? We don't give it again. Now, why is that so interesting? Because in principle, a man who gives his wife a get, forgetting about the 3 months, okay, we can leave that aside. But right, we don't want people swapping wives. Like you give her a get, you go something else. That's something that's legal. Whereas, right, or it's striking. Rabbi Rosen's why I pointed this out. But from the letter of the law, that's totally legal. It's totally okay. Right? You're using the Bible right, you're following the rules. And yet, says the Ramban, the Torah doesn't want that. Right? That's why the Torah speaks so strongly about this. In other words, right? When it's not even take the law into their hands. You use the law, but you use it in this kind of a cynical way, like Achashverosh did. I know it's to some extent, right? Then, yes. So
it's like avoiding the Petroviska or an Eruv.
Oh, okay. So you're saying we do that. You're saying we do this all the time. Okay. Right. Exactly.
Something different.
Right. There's something right because this ostensibly, and I think what's hiding behind the Ramban is this would somehow. It doesn't just damage society, right? That's the tachtiyat haaretz. I think what he's also reflecting is that this is somehow reflective of the nature of kiddushin. In other words, that somehow doing this would undermine the kiddushin. Right? In other words, that marriage, because marriage is not just, some sort of technical legal arrangement. There's something holy about whatever it is. When you want to go about, or this reminds me of the Ramban Bakdoshim to you. You have to go beyond, right? Don't be an aval b'reshut Torah, right? Don't just use the Bible and you can follow all the laws and still end up undermining everything. And I think that's kind of what's behind it in terms of the lo tachti etaretz and asharu tama. Again, you can do this and legally you're all fine, but the question is, have you kind of missed the point here to some extent?
Technically, adultery would fall in the same category, right? You would take her back. People who wasn't get because there might be some form of.
Yes, that's correct. The question is whether that's biblical or not. But the issue of asur labal, asur labo, is once she commits adultery, can you take her back? In principle, unless it's against her will. But it's in most cases correct. If she commits adultery willingly and she's caught and convicted, then yeah, she's not allowed to go back to her first husband. That is absolutely correct. Halachically, not only a Kohen, but the Kohen is more problematic and difficult and painful, which is even if she's raped, even it's against her will. But correct. So this raises the question. Really, is in other words, when I come back to the Psukim and I talk about that this isn't just a regular shtar, but it's there's avakatavla and vishilcha mi beito. All those things add a dimension or raise the a priori question: is a get just an act of peruk? Is it just act of taking something apart? Or is there actually, there was a legal framework in which they were together, and the get just undoes that? Or is the get much more than that? For instance, the get, right, like we said before, vishilcha, pritut. It's not just taking apart that which was created, but what was created wasn't just some sort of legal arrangement. What was created was, kedusha and something much more than that. And because kiddushin and nisuin, and because of that, in order to take it apart, you need something much more than just some sort of contractual agreement. So that's what I want to explore in two different ways today. One, always easy foil, right? This is almost every introductory shiur to Masechet Gittin. We'll start with this. Is the question of, well, we have an easy way to foil this. What is gerushin like? What does gerushin look like when there is no kiddushin? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have the standard foil, it's non-Jewish world. And in the non-Jewish world, there is no kiddushin. All the acts that we do, what we call the erusin or the kiddushin, which is the engagement, so to speak, which creates the legal framework, and then but doesn't allow for intimacy. And then following that, we have the nisuin, which creates the capacity to have intimacy. Right, that's in the sheva bracha. In our weddings, right, we have the first part, which is the kiddushin. That's what the rabbi does when he makes a bracha, and the man gives a woman a ring. Right, that's the erusin. Then we read the ketubah in the middle, and then a lot of couples getting married, so I'm doing this speech a lot these weeks, right? And then including tonight, and then we have the second ceremony, which is the sheva brachot or the chuppah, which is the kiddush, which is the nisuin, and allows for intimacy. Usually they were done a year apart, right? The non-Jewish world doesn't have those two ceremonies, right? What does it have is a good question. We'll see in a moment. But when the Mishnah talks about this, I just quoted from the Yerushalmi by accident. We'll come to the Yerushalmi in a second. But the Mishnah says, "Ha'isha nikneit b'shlosha drachim." This is the next source. V'konet atzmo b'shtei drachim nikneit b'kesef v'shtar b'via v'konet atzma b'get u'mitat habal. Sorry, the word yivama shouldn't be there. But so we have a woman niknit. That doesn't mean a woman. The Gemara makes it very clear on Daf Chet in Kiddushin that a woman body is not bought, right? Except according to one outlying shita. Right, a woman is. I think that came up in today's daf. If I'm not mistaken. That's Michelle, but she is there. The legal relationship is affected by kesef and shtar and bia. Right, the Gemara talks about in Kiddushin whether bia does nisuin, erusin and nisuin together, because after all, right. In other words, it's already in a moment of intimacy. So how could it only create the legal framework? But as an aside, the Gemara then the Mishnah talks about v'koneh et atzma. In other words, it's the same phrase. What does it mean? She buys herself. That we'll have to explain, either with a get or mitzat habal. The Yerushalmi says ad kedon b'Yisra. Those models are effective. In other words, meaning kiddushin, nisuin, and get for Jews. Ben nachrim. What about for non-Jews? How does that work? So Rabbi Yavo b'shem Rabbi Lezer. This is in kiddushin again. Ktiv. Hinach meit al ha'isha shelakacht v'hi be'ulat baal. Who's that? Remember chapter 20 of Genesis? Avimelech. Very good. Right now it's Avimelech takes Sarah, right? You remember the second time that Sarah is taken as a captive?
Yeah.
Right? And then God comes to him in a dream and says, you're going to die because of the woman you took. V'hi be'ulat Baal. She's married. She has had intimacy with someone else, right? Says Rabbi Avo in the Yerushalmi, ala be'ulatin chayavin. In other words, this threat to Avimelech was because Abraham had intimacy with her, right? It was intimate. Ve'en chayavin ala rusot. In other words, if Abraham and Sarah, again, taking this with the right, the grain of salt you have to take it with because it's a drasha from whatever. Obviously, this is what it means. But einan chayavin ala rusot. Arusot again, that's the first arrangement, right? That's the legal framework that makes her, right? It was in Judaism that makes her asur to everybody else, right? They're already married, so to speak. They're engaged, but they're married, right? That wouldn't be chayav because they haven't had intimacy yet. In other words, there is no kiddushin that there's kiddushin for a non-Jew, right? There is only, in other words, the way the framework is established according to Rabbi Avo for non-Jews is by intimacy. Okay, you understand? In other words, and then, right? The Gemara says it later on. Ad kedam Yisrael goyim Ravana. Whatever, I skipped the proof. Ared lamanu goyim ein lehem kiddushin. To which then the Gemara asks, which is much more relevant, not much relevant for us, it's connected. Maushi alahem girushin. So if you look at gerushin, right? This question is very, very suggestive for me. If you look at if you look at this is the best foil for me. In other words, if Jewish divorce isn't just undermining the legal relationship, but it's undermining much, much more than that, right? Intimacy in Jewish life creates kedusha, it creates some sort of greater framework than just the legal relationship. Then a get for Jews is going to also have to undo that. For a non-Jew, where there isn't that creation of this broader framework, it's just they're together, right? They're together today. So then the way they get apart is they're going to be separated. Right. You understand? So Judaism has two stages: the legal framework and the creation of interpersonal relationships. Non-Jews have one step, which I don't know how to define it. It could be the exact same. Right. Right. Excellent. So we don't know, right? There's no way to know, but it's clearly something different, right? I'm suggesting it's something less, right? But it's certainly something different, right? So the Gemara then says, Rav Yehuda bar Pazi, Rav Chanan b'shem Rav Huna Ruba Ditziporin. So these two rabbis, Rav Yehuda is just Rav Yehuda ben Pazi. Rav Chanan is the name of Rav Huna, the Rav of Tzipor. O she'ein lahem gerushin. Either there is no divorce. Now again, this might be like where the Christians get it, right? In other words, we're reflecting what they knew about the non-Jewish world at that point. No, it isn't the man, right? Our text, I didn't emphasize this, but it's obvious that the man initiates the gerushin. Again, nowadays it's a little different because the man can't, right? We can't have a divorce without the woman's consent also. But at the time of the Bible, the man gives the divorce. It's initiated by the man, etc. Etc. What does Shnei Megarshin said? How do you understand that? Either they have to agree, right? But it isn't like, right, it isn't
Each
one.
has agency in both.
What do you mean it has agency with that?
Megarshin, the exact opposite of the Matanlah.
Oh, it's each one.
Each one.
Well, we don't know. It doesn't even say there's a get.
But
right?
They're not passive.
Okay, let's continue with the Gemara a little. So again, it provides a good foil because we have something, either there's no gerushin at all. By the way, there's the if you don't think I'm being serious about this, if you just jump down to the Ran for a moment, the next text, the Ran quotes Rabbeinu David, who we remember from Psachim fame, right? He has a whole book on Psachim. The Ran quotes, right? The Ran is in Gerona, right? In the end of the 13th century, and he quotes Rabbeinu David, who says, you see that text? Rabbeinu David katab b'chidushav shekarovu shneimar shebnei Noach ein lo heter leolam b'gerushin. Or it's not that they don't need an active gerushin; it's that they're stuck, right?
But most of the world was Catholic at that time, and they didn't.
I don't know.
Actual, right, Catholics that are around them, or they're talking.
No, I don't know.
B'nai Noach in the abstract.
He's saying
like
B'nai Noach in the
the
abstract.
word
He's saying right.
So
Correct.
So
Meaning, one sec. Let me explain to you. I'll explain to you what that means. If you take the Yerushalmi seriously, and you take the Rabbeinu David's explanation of that, that means, again, you're talking about, not if we were in charge, you're talking about the level of punishment. Forget about the level of punishment and enforcement. Let's just talk about on the level of Shav Mitzvah B'nai Nach.
Okay.
Right? A man is together with another woman, that creates the marriage bond. Right? The woman then goes ahead, or the man, as far as I know. There's no reason to think that, but let's just assume the woman so that we don't have to get to a place where we're not going to be, we don't know. And she's with another man, that constitutes Araya. She has violated Shav Mitzvah B'nai Nach.
Right.
We don't enforce that, but unless we have autonomy, but that's
We know a riot is one of some.
right. If you say that,
He's probably included in that.
right, exactly.
So therefore.
And if Ein Lahem Gerushin, we got a lot of problems on our hands. Right? In other words, the world is problematic. Again, that's the most extreme formulation. Remember, in Yerushalmi, there's a machloket. It's not done the same way we do it. It's Shnehem Megarshin Zed Zed. How does that happen? We'll find out in a second, right?
How the Yerushalmi, they were much more thinking about pagans than they were about Christians.
Correct. For sure. But here we're talking about, again, Rabbi David is living under. Remember, but again, that's only one explanation. If we continue in the Yerushalmi for a minute, Oshen Lem Gerushin, Oshen Shnei Megarshin Zed Zed, Rav Yochanan the Tzipor and Rav Acha Rav Chinu b'Shem Rishua Bar Nachman. Right? In other words, they all say there's a pasuk in Malachi. It says Kisanei Shalach. When God talks about it in Malachi, He says God hates people who are Shalach, people who hate, who send away. Right? And Shalach is the word for Gerushin in this case. Right? Ad et Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Right? It says that at the end of that pasuk. Yisrael natati Gerushin. He gives a pasuk. The lo natati Gerushin ba'umot ha'olam. There is no Gerushin in the umot ha'olam. Right? And the next guy says the exact same thing. Okay, we can be satisfied with that right now. So skip down. So the Ran says, the Ran adopts this position, and he says, according to Rabbeinu David, Goyim have no Gerushin. Now, how can we explain this? If we wanted to, right? So what we could say is, what is Gerushin? What is get? What is a get? What is divorce in Jewish tradition? Divorce in Jewish tradition is unpacking this, not just a formal legal relationship, but some sort of, again, I want to try to give it, over the course of time, I want to try to develop what it is. But whatever the omni-significance of the Jewish marriage entity is, right? Gerushin is taking apart that thing apart piece by piece, by all the things that we described. V'katav la, v'natan la sefer kritut, v'natan bi'adav v'shilcha mi beito. All those things. Non-Jews, again, this isn't the judgment call, just they don't have the creation of that moment of omni-significance, and therefore there's just no way to unpack the legal, right? There's no way to unpack the legal relationship, or there is no legal relationship. You could say a lot of different things. But what it does highlight is that the Jewish view of this is going to give much more significance to the get, right? The get is not just a contract. It's something much more, it's much bigger, right? So again, what I'm trying to do is build a case. Number one, the Psukim themselves talk about it, right? Number two, when we contrast it, again, we'll see the alternative in a second. When we contrast it to the non-Jewish world, right? The non-Jewish world doesn't have Gerushin. How can you make, what do you mean it doesn't have Gerushin? So again, Rabbeinu David is the most extreme for they don't have Gerushin because it doesn't exist, right? That's striking because it suggests that what Gerushin, if Gerushin was just, if Jewish divorce was just the unpacking of a legal relationship, then there'd be no reason not to have it by non-Jews. But if it's something much more significant, maybe something other than unpacking the legal relationship, then hey, and it makes sense to say we have no Gerushin. And again, even in the more moderated form, which is the Rambam's formulation of the Yerushalmi, where of course there is Gerushin, of course non-Jews can get divorced, it's still going to be, there's a contrast between the Jewish divorce and the non-Jewish divorce. Okay, so the Rambam, this is the left text there, the Rambam talks about Hilchot Malachim. The reason is because in Hilchot Malachim, the Rambam talks about the way part of the issues of Avdut, right? So he says as follows, Ben Noach Sheyiched Shivcha, right? He has a non-Jewish, he has a non-Jewish maidservant, and then he was miyachid to his eved. He already has a Jewish slave or non-Jewish slave, and he says, "Oh, you sleep with her, you're going to be together, so I can have the kids." Words. He has, if the master then sleeps with her, or it's after he said, "You're going to be married to my slave," so then he gets killed because it's the wife of his friend. Amula debate debit, that's the wife of Eved Ploni. Okay. When, so again, if he married off his slave to the woman, that's not the part that's important to us. When all right. The gifts. So thank you all online who sent me those gifts. Actually, the one person who did send me is not online right now. Okay. Anyway, so sorry. Okay. In other words, okay, so now the master married off his slave to this woman. And now when is the shifcha allowed to go back to be with him? Okay. Once he separates him out from the Eved, in other words, they separate, and they pull off her hair covering in the shul. There's an act here, a formal act when it comes to the shifcha, right? In other words, he basically does an act that's demonstrable that the maidservant is no longer married to the Eved. Then the Ram says, so when is an Eshet Chavero kigusha shelanu? When in general in the non-Jewish world is there Gittin, which is their gerushin? So he doesn't accept Rabbeinu David's thing. There is no such thing. He says, listen what he says. If the man sends the woman out of his house and she becomes independent, right? He sends her out to independence. Oh, She'ein lahem gerushin. Here the Rav adds an important word. Bichtav. Okay, this is the more moderated. This is not Rabbeinu David, right? This is, right, you understand? It's not they don't have gerushin at all. They have gerushin, but they don't have written gerushin. Ve'ena davar talui bo bilvad. Levad, sorry, it's not only up to him. Ella kol zman sheyirtzehu ohili frosh mizeh zemizeh porshi. Okay, that's a very interesting formulation. Whenever anybody wants to separate out, they can separate out. Okay, so this again raises the question in a more moderated form. Okay, so the way non-Jews get divorced is that either he sends her out, or there's two options. Either he sends her out of the house. Maybe here the Rambam is saying that sending her out of the house is not so important. Maybe he's saying, oh, that's basically what we do, except they just don't have, there's one technical thing. We have a written document and they don't have a written document, then maybe it's technical. Right? Maybe there's there's clearly two maslulim here for the Rambam, right? Either sending her out or they just decide to, right, separate. Right? In other words, it's not divorce, it's separation. Mm-hmm. That constitutes divorce for the Rambam, at least in the second formulation. How does this reflect on Jewish marriage? It's not clear to me. Right? In other words, it's much easier for me to deal with the extremes of Rabbeinu David. But according to this, you still could make the argument. It's not going to be as strong or as crisp to say, oh, Jewish divorce is something totally different. Because here the Rambam does allow for the possibility, right? And the Rambam talks about bichtav. It's just a technical, it sounds like it's a more technical thing. Or you could say, no. The Rambam, or the Ktav, reflects something much bigger that's going on in the Gerushin. The fact that you have to write a contract, right? And then we'd have to explore, right? That's the segue into the second part of today's shir, right? The fact that you have to write a contract as opposed to just separating out demonstrates that there's something bigger going on here, right? And that will relate particularly to what the content of the contract is. Does this contract look like every other contract?
The Roman uses the language too, but Yates and Beta.
Where? In which part?
In this formulation, right?
In the first option or the second one? Oh, mishet teitzehi mitachar reshuto v'telecha.
That's referencing in both. No, it's not just the Ktav. He's saying the same. It might be, that we talked earlier, maybe that we thought that was a unique thing. Maybe it's referenced here as well.
I don't understand what you're saying. In other words, in which option are you talking about? When he says the when is she? By the way, I love the phrase. When is she going to be like our grusha, right? Which our grusha is a clear maslul, right? They have to figure it out, right? Go ahead. Mishiotziana, there you're saying.
And it's repeated then on the other one with opposite. But the only thing is we said that there's a distinction made in what's Jewish divorce, and it seems that one of the criteria is this sending out, but it might be including that maybe in the non-Jewish,
right? No, I'm saying right. No, it's clear that right. So the bottom line is the Ram has a more moderated formulation of the Yerushalmi, right? The Yerushalmi can be taken don't have any divorce. And then I'm saying that would be a stark contrast to Jewish divorce, which is clearly not just undoing the legal relationship, but undoing something much bigger. Or, right, the Rambam has a more moderated view, where he says there's two maslulim for getting out of, for non-Jews to, yes, get out. One sounds a lot more like ours, right? He kicks her out of the house, or he sends her out of the house, not kicks her out, he sends her out of the house, and it's just missing the, right, Elem Gerushin Bichtav. Right, it's just a small, it sounds like a small technical thing. But then there's this other maslul, which is basically not unilaterally, mutually, they both decide to split up. And that's also divorce. So in that second one, clearly there's something different than our thing. That's not just Ein Lehem Gerushin Bichtav. They have a whole different way of doing this, which their creation, and again, I come back to the Bulad Baal. The creation happened because of an act of intimacy, and it dissolves because of an act of separation, right? Unlike Jewish divorce, which has two pieces of it, the erusin, the creation of a legal relationship, plus the intimacy that creates the, right? I know it's not called kiddushin, but that's because that's already not kiddushin, but it creates something much more. And then the divorce, which, maybe has to undo both of those pieces. Okay, so the best way to test this in terms of seeing how different Judaism's vision of divorce is not just. By the way, I should say that this actually might be the debate. I started with the Mishnah Beit Shammai Beit Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, right? This might be the debate between Beit Shammai Beit Hillel on one side and Rabbi Akiva on the other hand. Remember, what did Beit Shammai Beit Hillel say? Beit Shammai Beit Hillel say you need an ilah. Again, you need a cause. Give me a legal word for that. Justification. There must be a legal word. No, it's the cause is you need some sort of claim in court.
Yeah.
Right? She was having adult. She was an adult. She was having sexual impropriety, or she cooked my. She burnt my food. Oh, I should have said some of the Mepharshim say she burnt my food on purpose. I forgot to tell you that. That was like in parentheses. She burnt my food on purpose, and that's
in the US,
as opposed to just 1 second. As opposed to Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Akiva say? Found someone else, right? So you just divorce her. It could be that's the machloket, right? Rabbi Akiva sees divorce as it's just a legal thing. You were married, that's a very technical legal thing. You were forget about his relationship with his wife, but no, because we know things about his relationship with his wife, not only the 24 years that he was away, right? But again, without making personal sense, but you understand, in other words, if you see it as a very, very strict legal thing and you don't see some sort of irony significance of this, so it's much easier to say, oh, you found someone else, right? That's to some extent, Rabbi Akiva is the Ramban's. We don't want him giving a get tonight and getting it back tomorrow, right? Oh, you found someone else, so we just move on. As opposed to Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, or certainly Beit Shammai, right? But maybe even Beit Hillel, like, what are you talking about? Like, you have to have some, grounds. That's the word. Grounds for divorce. Okay, that's the word. That's the word I was looking for before. Yeah,
so in the U.S., it used to be that you had to have grounds. It was Beit Shammai, and then the court said, the courts and the legislature said, this is crazy. People have to come into court. They have to be so acrimonious. Two people can just fall. They can just fall out of love, and so they came up and said you have no fault.
Right, no fault divorce. Exactly. Right. That's Rabbi Akiva basically.
Right, which is like right. You don't have to prove adultery or claim adultery.
Right. Right. The non-Jewish divorce in the second maslul of the Rambam is what they call in England, it's a decree nisi, that's what it's called in England, something like that, where they just, they unilaterally declare, right? I don't know if those of you remember one of those crazy Gittin cases I was involved where we hired the lawyer and we put the guy in jail in London. But you remember that case, right? So there we had the court declared, right? The original story of that guy was that he knew his wife was here and he knew but he wanted to get married again. So he just went into court and said, I don't know where my wife is. And, I was married for 5 years and she's disappeared. He knew he was here and he knew he had a kid and whatever, but he just didn't care. And the court just declared them divorced. I said, you're separate. You don't know where your wife is. Okay, you're divorced. Right. And then we came back to court and undid the divorce because we proved that he knew he had his wife here, right, for all those years. So,
but why do you have to assume that Akiva doesn't believe that even if you said the cause, the grounds are limited, you still have a Jewish way of divorce?
No, correct.
Why would the grounds impact? Because I think the difference.
Because I think his grounds are so, thin, right? His grounds are so thin that the divorce, it doesn't seem like he gives so much significance to the whole marriage thing. Once you say, like, you found someone else, so you can go, just go marry them.
I thought there was a distinction that all three of them would agree on. The Judaism has an approach to marriage of divorce that just says this is covered. There's some extra thing here that I don't have.
Okay, yeah, it could be. I'm not saying 100%. I'm just saying that's what strikes me, but it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, so let's start piecing together the main part, which is the shiluach. So, are there any indications that that it was having talked about the fact that maybe Jewish divorce is not just undoing something, undoing a legal relationship, but much more than that. So the best way to test that is to ask ourselves, to what extent does she actually have to, not just, if it was just a legal thing, then like every other legal thing, we can sign a contract right here and we've made an arrangement. But one of the dimensions is this v'shilach mebeito, right? Which again, I acknowledge appears in the non-Jewish world as well, right? But are there any indications that v'shilach mebeito is serious? That it's not just contractual, but somehow this separation of the house also, is a dimension of Jewish divorce. So the Rambam, right? It's the flip side of what I said. Of the representing the house. So here, fair. So maybe that's the case. Correct.
That's what's in play in the first Mishnah.
Why?
Well, they're far away from each other.
Yes, that also occurred to me. Yes, so the Mishnah starts off in a place where they're already not together. That occurred to me also. But this would be the flip side of that as well, right? So the Rambam says, when the Rambam talks about Gerushin at the beginning, he says, Zeshanem arba Torah v'shilcham meito. When it says in the Torah, you see where I am in the text here? Mm-hmm. Don't think the Gittin is not right. There's a Havamina to think that actually they wouldn't be divorced, it's just she leaves the house. No, don't think that. Okay, so the Rambam is pretty clear on this, right? That it has nothing to do with the house. Right? So, right. That's a good question. What do you think? Right? What does he think it means is a good question. However, notwithstanding the Rambam, there are some indications throughout the Masechet that, and Rabbi Gittin is very into this, like this is one of his big themes, right? There's a Gemara in Yevamot, on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, that asks about divorcing a woman who's a shota, right? A woman who became, right, doesn't understand anymore what's going on, right? And there's a Gemara there that says, the Gemara says you can't divorce a woman who's a shota. Why not? Not only she doesn't understand, but she might just come back. Right? Because you actually have to send her away. She doesn't remember. Maybe she has, lack of, let's just forget about her mental state. Maybe she just she has amnesia. So she keeps coming back to her house. Right? So it says the Gemara, you can't divorce her if she keeps coming back to her house. So here you see, notwithstanding the Rambam, that there are indicators that Bishilcham Beito actually has to be, where we have to somehow not just we have to break physical bonds, not just legal bonds. Right, exactly. What do you mean?
A marriage is a pattern. You live together.
Right. Okay. I like what Jeff said before. I'll adopt what you said because I like it. Right. It was the chuppah represents the bayit, but you somehow built a home. You've created this moment of greater significance. Again, without making judgment calls about the non-Jewish world, whatever, just for whatever reason. But you've had the erusin, you've had the nisuin, and now, in order to take that apart, you actually have to take apart the house. Short of that, right? Notwithstanding the Rambam, right? Well, how the Rambam, we'll have to come back to how the Rambam explained, does this and what the Rambam does about this case if we ever get back to this. But the fact that there is an indicator, it's in the fact that some people, right, the outliers can't necessarily get divorced because they can't reach the threshold of Bishilcham Beito. That's very fascinating. Or how about the Reed's very famous formulation, right? The Gemara never says that you have to say anything when you get divorced, right? There's no parallel to the Kariyat Mekudeshetli, right? There's no parallel to that. Correct. But the Re, it's in the 12th century, comes along the Re and says, there's an Amira that goes with this. In other words, it has to be super clear exactly what's going on, right? The Gemara has all sorts of cases. What if I gave you a thing and I said, oh, here's your, right? The Gemara has this discussion, right? Here's your, right? I bought you a birthday gift, right? The Gemara has it's a star or whatever. I bought you a birthday gift, and then she opens it up and says, wait, this is a get. He says, oh yeah, right? Is that a get or not? Right? Exactly. But the Re in Gittin, Re ayam matzrich, right? Noten get li shto lomer, hey gitech. V'gam, you have to say, "Arei ad muter l'kol adam." In other words, there's a need. So Rabbi Gittin said, "Oh, you see here, there's something much more significant. The fact that you require not just clarity, but you require, an active sending out." Right, exactly. It's right. So again, it's a rollback of the wrong area, in my opinion, right? Because remember, Arei Mekudeshetli is the erusin, it's not the kiddushin. But the fact that you require that at all seems to indicate that there's a shiluchin. There's something much bigger than just 1 second, right? Than just the the disintegration of the legal relationship. Something very much I wanted to say when I v'shalach. Yes, the very fact that the biblical word is v'shalach mi beitom is significant here. On my Shabbos drushes are always on like when's the first time, right? Every other week I say when's the first time this word was used. But v'shalach is a very, very powerful word in the Bible because the first time that appears is in the Garden of Eden, right? When you're kicked out of paradise, it's v'shalach, right? When you're kicked out, and then the word v'shalach. So it's a very, very strong word, right? Or even the very fact that the content of the get, right, is written in a particular way might be indicative that there's something bigger going on here in terms of a get. And let me show you that, because the Mishnah just talks about what is the gufo shel get. Forget about the 12 lines, which it is, and we'll see it at some point. We'll read a get at some point, and maybe I'll even show you one, right? So gufo shel get, haret muter l'kol adam, right? This is, again, the Ri said you have to say these words, but the Mishnah says you just have to be written in the thing. But how is it written? So here, just take a step back for a moment and ask yourself, how is a star usually written? What is a star? So how's my ketubah written, right? My ketubah is there. So, excuse me for one sec. I'll take my ketubah off the wall, right?
Actually, it's not your ketubah.
It's Michelle's too. Okay, so I will take it because it's Michelle. What does it say? How does it start off? It starts off with a date. On such and such day, and such and such thing, what happened? What does it say? What happened? Anan Sahadeh, we saw Ech Shachatan, right? Listen closely. We saw Ech Shachatan, Shaul Eliezer ben Yudalev, right? Said to the Kala, forget about that. Obviously, we taught this before because I happen to have noticed that somewhere in my Gemara I have a ketubah. I just noticed it this morning. I must have taken it out. Okay, sorry. Okay, anyway, it says we noticed what's a regular star? A star is Sfirat Varim. It tells the story. We witnessed how he said to her. Okay, so there's different types of shtarot. Just big picture for a moment. There's shtare raya. There's a star that this happened, and there's shtare kinyan. There's the shtarot that affect something. A get is a star kinyan, right? It affects something. But does it tell the story? Does the word, one word, we witness, right? The witness is silent. Does it say how such and such happened or not? That incredibly is a machloket rishon. What it says in the get. Okay? Does the get say on such and such a day and such a time?
We witnessed man give.
Behold how man gave to a woman get and said haret muter l'kol adam. Or does the get just say you are whatever, and the witness is silent on it at the end? Okay? So look at the Rambam, right? The Rambam says this is the Rambam's get, right? Zeu nusach haget. Bekach b'Shabbat, bekach v'kach le'arech ploni, b'shat kach v'kach le'yitzira, o l'shtarot. We'll come back to counting by shtarot, and for those who are not familiar with that, they had a different way of counting, and many of the things that we found in the Geniza were not counted based on the Hebrew year, but based on something else. In the play in the counting that we count here. So the Rambam has it like a regular star. Ech ana ploni bar ploni, makom ploni. Okay, how I, right? It's a sfirat, right? It's telling the story. On such and such a date, how, behold, I gave this get to so and so, right? I'll just read the next line because you're wondering why shum is in there, right? Kol shum acharon v'chanicha di'itli. I'll just explain to you what that means for 1 second. We'll come back to this at some point. Shum is just shame. Okay, this is one of the great. You'll love this. It's one of the great debates in Tosfot ever, right? The Gemara says you have to write your name and all the names that you have. There's two ways to read that. Either you have to write your name, quote, and all the names that you have, or you have to write your name and all the names that you have without the quotations. Okay, so that's two opinions in Tosfot, right? So today's Gittin, we write both, right? You write Shaul Eliezer, who's also named Seth, who's also named Seth Andrew. We write all that, and that's why we do something called a Beirur Shemot in the courts before. Right? In other words, you can never just walk into a Beit Din and get a get, because you need to do a Beirur Shemot first, where they have to find out. You have to bring witnesses as to all your names. In the Tosafos version and the Rambam's version, it's much easier. You write Seth and all the names, or Shaul and all the names that he has. Right? You understand? You write those words. Okay. But anyway, the bottom line is the Rambam's formulation is Eich. You will note the Rush, and that was the Rif's formulation as well. The Rush, right, reflecting not the right. Remember, the Rush moves from Ashkenaz to Sfarad, right? You see where I am? Yeah, do you have the text? Okay. L'reach ploni shnat kach l'kach b'yerdel mina shani monim kan b'mata ploni diat val nar ploni ana ploni. He doesn't have the word ech. He doesn't have the word behold, right? And the Rush, just to make it clear, so you don't think I'm just making this up, the Rush says in the next formulation, right? I saw in the Gittin of the Rif, shekatavo ech ana ploni v'shar v'chein b'shar tovsei tikun hagdolim ve'eino nofel al halashon devadai b'shtar. It doesn't make any sense. Nofel al halashon means it doesn't fall on the tongue, but it means it's not the right way of formulating it. When the witnesses write a star that this took place in front of them, this is again, this you could tell me this is just technical. No, this is wow, this really is indicative of something much bigger. Right now. Behold how we saw this happen. That is not what a get is. A get, right, it does things, it affects something. So even the very content of the get might indicate that this star is doing something, right? It's not just if you need witnesses to describe how the legal entity hitparek, disintegrated, fell apart, dissolved, thank you. So then why not have it, right? Again, it's not the most compelling evidence, but all this stuff together. Yeah, go ahead.
Between memorializing the act and actually it being the act.
Correct. That's a great way of saying it. So it being the act, but it's not just that it being the act, because you could still say it's the act, but it's still an act of dissolving the relationship. But I think based on some of the other stuff we're saying, it's not just built. In other words, this star is not just dissolving a legal relationship; it's actually doing something much more significant. It's not just right to contrast it. It's not just walking away from someone else's house. Mm-hmm. Right, there's a formal ceremonial thing that actually does something much more. That that does something much bigger. One sec. About how to do this. Okay, let's skip this for now. All right. Yeah. Okay, there's one more text I'm going to do today, which also might be indicative of this same phenomenon. Okay, it's the last text. It's a text that the Briskers love. I also happen to love it just because it's very fascinating. Because it raises all sorts of, the Gemara Daf Hey and Kiddushin raises all sorts of very, very fascinating possibilities. But there's one line in there that I think is also might play into this whole discussion. The Gemara there is discussing how does a woman get married by shtar. What's a shtar kiddushin? But shtar kiddushin is not the ketubah, right? We know that shtar kiddushin is not the ketubah. The ketubah is a document that anchors the rights of the woman in the case of marriage. A shtar kiddushin is like kesef kiddushin, right? The man gives the woman kesef, the man gives the woman a shtar, and it says, "You are now married to me," right? And the witnesses sign on the thing. Okay. So the Gemara says, how do we know that a woman can get married by kiddushin? V'dinu, the Gemara says, kal v'chomer, u'ma kesef she'ein motzi machnis. You can't get divorced by giving money, right? That's for sure. You have to give a get, right? So if you can't get divorced by giving money, and yet you can still get married by giving money, so shtar shemotzi, a shtar that you can get divorced with, certainly you should be able to get married with. Eno din shem machnis. Okay, that's interesting. So the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily kal v'chomer. You don't follow that?
I don't understand the kal v'chomer at all.
Okay, neither do the rabbis. But again, it means that get has more, in the subset of get, we have more ways to do this, right? You can
give a get.
They're just setting it. They want to understand power.
Sorry, the other way around. Kiddushin has more ways. Or the other way around. Kiddushin has more ways. So it's if Kiddushin get can't be done by kesef, Kiddushin can be done by kesef. So get, which can be done by shtar, since Kiddushin already showed that it's more powerful, it certainly should be able to be done by shtar. Okay? So the Gemara says, no, malak kesef, she can't put in bohekdesh u'maiser sheni. However, shtar shein put in bohekdesh u'maiser sheni, but it's kesef isn't an indicator of anything, because kesef you can do certain things with you can't do with shtar. Right? You can take maiser sheni out with kesef, but you can't take it out with a shtar. So Amar Kra, this is the part that's important to me. Amar Kra v'yatza v'haita. Makish havayli yitzia. So the Gemara says, okay, I'll come up with another explanation of how you know that you can get married with a shtar. It says, right? She goes out and then she gets married to somebody else. That's our psukim, right? Makish havayli yitzia. So it's a hekesh. It's not a kabbachover. Hekesh is just a comparison. Ma yitzia b'shtar, just like you can get divorced with a shtar. Afavayanam b'shtar. Gemara says, okay, you want to compare divorce and marriage, which is, of course, for me, that plays perfectly into what I want to say, right? Or it's Jewish marriage is erusin plus nisuin. So and divorce. So Gemara says, okay, I'm gonna, right? What do they say? Instead of I seize you and I see you and I raise you one, right? You want to compare and say that just like you can get divorced with a shtar, you can get divorced with marriage. So just like you can get married with kesef, you should be able to get divorced with kesef. How would that work? Is a machlok in the Rishonim. Who would give who the kesef? How would it work? Very, very interesting. We're thinking about explaining. But you see that line is very important, right? Right? Okay, let money. Okay, why is this important to me? So you understand why this is important to me? Because the Gemara is opening the possibility that somehow divorce and marriage are their flip sides, but on the basis of the fact that Jewish marriage is not just the creation of some sort of legal relationship. We have erusin and nisuin, and therefore Jewish divorce also has to be not just the dissolution or the dissolving of some legal relationship, but actually the taking apart of those components that have created the kedusha. And again, so that line, the Gemara in the end, Rabbi comes up. He says, "Yomru." People are going to say, "Kesef machis kesef motzi sanegori yaseh kategor." Okay, that's right. Yom Kippur already, right? What are you talking about? The thing that helped you out is the thing that gets you out. It wouldn't be right. And the Gemara ends up coming up with some sort of technical reason why you can't get divorced by money. And again, like I say, the Briskers have a field day. The Rishonim already have a field day with this. Who would give who the money? Just think about it. Who would give who the money? Would the man give the woman the money, or the woman give the man the money? So it depends on how you view what marriage is, right? That's a machloket. Okay, anyways, if you view it like she's buying her way out, then the woman give the man money, right? Right, correct. On the other hand, how does a shtar work? How does a kedusha shtar work? The man gives the woman the shtar, right? So if you're going to compare that to kedusha, right? And in Gittin, it works the same way, right? So in this case also, the man should be giving the woman money, right? That's very interesting, right? That relates to the question of also Hisham Baknat, that's right? That line as well. Okay, but I'm putting that on the side for now. The bottom line is that if I summarize, both in the psukim, we have some drama, not just in terms of the fact that the crescendo of the divorce is not divorce, but it's this returning, right? Which relates to the issue of not using divorce, for something, just you can get divorced tonight and married again tomorrow, right? That suggests that divorce is something much bigger, right? I realize that's already the suggestion, right? That's how I started, but also that divorce has multiple components to it, right? The katavla, sefer kritu, tvinatan biada, and even v'shilchami beito, right? Shilcham beito, which the Ram says, don't think it means she has to leave the house. But we saw a Gemara in Yevamot that says she has to leave the house, right? And we saw that he has to make it clear and say, not just have it written in the get, but say the, harayat muteret l'kol adam, and as Dov said, I like your formulation, right, about what the get does, right? The get is not, we don't write eich, the get is not just firat, it doesn't just describe what happened. The get doesn't, what was the word you used? Right, it doesn't memorialize, it actually affects, right? It creates a chalot, and that's the big thing about Kiddushin and Gittin, right? No, Kiddushin and Gittin is not created, and when we contrast it to the non-Jewish world, again, without making judgments, but the way the non-Jewish world gets together, again, according to the halachic formulations, is by acts of intimacy, and the way that's dissolved is by separation. Judaism has a two-step process, which seems to create some sort of greater significance. Again, how we define that, we'll have to see over the course of time, but we call it, holiness or whatever. The very fact that we use that word is indicative of something, and therefore, to take that apart, we also need something much bigger. Again, something much bigger that might have, it might affect the way the get is written, what the guy says, how it happens, the extent to which he has to leave the house, and even suggestions like, we can compare Gittin and Kiddushin. Those all indicate that there's something much bigger going on. So what much bigger is going on and how much bigger is going on and how that all happens, that's the content of the Masechet. To begin next time. Thank you. Okay. Good start. You asked questions that I thought about, but I don't have the answers yet.
You have 2 weeks.
Right. I'll get back to you. Next Sunday, we certainly will not have a shir because because I will be at the Davis Cup. No, but I just I saw this morning that the Davis Cup, I should turn off the thing first, but I saw this morning that the Davis Cup is being played. I said, oh, no, my father, he loves tennis. They have to play on Rosh Hashanah, like both days, 2 days of play of games. It's right here, and it's on Rosh Hashanah both days, and it's not even in the evening. Too bad. Okay, talk to you soon. Seth, welcome back.